Welcome to the 8th episode of 2 Cents Tuesday. The countries in the Caribbean, like other small island developing states, or SIDS as we call them, are on the front line of the battle against climate change. For many developed countries in the global north, climate change is still largely an academic issue, something to be debated, researched, and investigated. For them, the discussion centers mostly around what will happen by the end of this century. However, for us in the Caribbean, climate change is a clear and present danger, something that we are living and experiencing every single day of our lives. The facts are clear and irrefutable. The 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC as it is known, has shown that atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide, one of the deadly greenhouse gases, are at their highest concentration in at least 2 million years, while the concentrations of the other two greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide, are at their highest levels in at least 800,000 years. It has been 45 years since our planet has had a colder than average year, and human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. For small island developing states, this is translating into more excessively warm days, significant variability in rainfall, warmer oceans, loss of coastlines due to sea level rise, more intense droughts, more frequent flooding, and more severe hurricanes. Our marine and terrestrial ecosystems are under threat. Our rich biodiversity is in peril. Water insecurity is becoming a serious concern. Countries that depend on groundwater sources have to contend with inadequate aquifer recharge rates due to a reduction in overall rainfall and the salinization of groundwater sources due to saltwater intrusion from sea level rise. The countries that depend on rivers and surface water for their potable water and crop irrigation, like ours in St. Lucia, are faced with diminishing supplies because of irregularity and a reduction in precipitation. Food security is being threatened by warmer temperatures and changes in rainfall patterns, which is impacting the production of food crops, many of which are rain-fed. Our oceans are getting warmer and also more acidic as they're being forced to absorb more carbon dioxide. And this is negatively impacting our fisheries sector. Additionally, our coral reefs are being damaged by the increasing temperatures and acidity. And this, in turn, is affecting the dive sector and the tourism industry, on which so many of our island economies depend. This is why, for us in the Caribbean, the pace and tenor of the discussion cannot be influenced by the gradualism that the phrase climate change implies. Our dialogue has to shift to one that recognizes the gravity of the climate crisis that we are experiencing and the existential threat that it poses to all small island developing states. The avenue that exists to address the threat of climate change is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC as it is known, which was signed at the Earth Summit that was held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in June 1992. Since 1995, the countries, and there are over 190 of them, that are parties to this convention have met annually to take stock of the progress of the global battle against climate change and to agree on new measures that should be taken to address the threats posed by climate change, including means of providing support to the countries that are most vulnerable to climate change. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a multilateral mechanism for dealing with a problem that, although initially it was viewed as an environmental issue, has wide-reaching and profound economic, social, cultural, and political consequences. In December 2015, the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change came together at the 21st Conference of the Parties, or COP21 as it is called, and adopted the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement committed, among other things, to, and I quote, holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, unquote. And also, quote again, making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development, unquote. Unfortunately, despite the goals agreed to in the Paris Agreement and the commitments that have been made in nationally determined contributions by developed countries, our planet is headed for warming of 2.4 degrees Celsius or higher. The last 7 years have been the hottest our planet has experienced since we started keeping records in 1880. Yet, since the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015, the G20 countries, the developed countries, the rich developed countries, have continued to subsidize fossil fuels by $3 trillion US. And these same countries committed $151 billion US to fossil fuels in their respective COVID-19 recovery packages. Conversely, the financial support to tackle climate change that was promised in 2009 to developing countries like ours and the rest of the Caribbean of $100 billion US annually from 2020 is far from being realized. Oxfam reported in 2020 that of the estimated annual average of $59.5 billion US in climate finance that was claimed by the developed countries, the climate-specific net assistance that was received by developing countries may be no more than 19 to 22 billion US dollars. At the most recent Conference of the Parties in Glasgow, Scotland last year, China and India prevented the adoption of an agreement on the phasing out of dirty coal power. A pledge to transition to electric vehicles was not supported by the United States of America, China, Germany, South Korea, or Japan. A much touted USA-China climate declaration contained very little substance on what would actually be done. And the USA, the European Union, and other developed countries rejected the establishment of a new loss and damage fund, a new financing mechanism for vulnerable countries like ours that are experiencing the irreversible impacts of climate change. In other words, at the Glasgow Conference of the Parties last year, the small island developing states and other climate vulnerable countries that are the most vulnerable to climate change, to a crisis, to the climate crisis, a crisis that they did not cause, were once again the ones asked to make all the compromises. The question that we must now answer as climate vulnerable Caribbean countries is, should we continue to rely solely on the multilateral negotiations process as our only recourse for action on climate change? Has the time come for us to demand climate justice at the international level for citizens, our citizens, who continue to see our livelihoods lost, our biodiversity threatened, our quality of life diminished, our country's infrastructure destroyed, and our lives imperiled by climate change and extreme weather events? In a landmark decision in October 2021, just last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution that recognizes the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Therefore, should we now start demanding justice for our citizens from the corporations and the countries that have denied and continue to deny us our right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? My answer is yes. Let's see how long it takes our leaders to also come to that conclusion. Thank you for viewing another 2 Cents Tuesday. Have a safe and productive week, and God willing, we will see each other next week. Goodbye.